What would you do if a complete stranger walked up to you on a public beach and demanded you leave, like they owned the sand beneath your feet? The morning was perfect, the kind of peaceful dawn that made the world feel untouched. The ocean stretched endlessly, its rhythmic waves rolling onto the shore, pulling back only to return with the same steady resolve. The sky was painted in soft pastels, the sun still waking up, casting a golden glow across the sand. It was the kind of morning where nothing seemed rushed, where time slowed just enough to make you forget the chaos of daily life. I had just settled in, spreading my towel over the warm sand, letting out a contented sigh. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and sun, the only sounds were the whispers of waves and the distant calls of seagulls. It was peaceful, perfect, mine to enjoy, until it wasn't. That's when I saw her. She stood at the entrance of the beach, still as a statue, surveying the scene like a self-appointed ruler of the coastline. The way her eyes darted from one person to another, calculating, assessing, sent an immediate chill through my spine. Even from a distance, there was something unsettling about her stance, like she was on a mission, looking for someone to target. Then, her gaze locked onto me. A slow, deliberate stare. Not the kind of glance someone gives in passing, but a look of scrutiny, as if she was deciding whether or not I belonged. I could feel her eyes boring into me, dissecting my very presence on the beach like I was an intruder trespassing on private property. Entitlement radiated off of her in waves stronger than the ocean itself. I tried to ignore it, forcing myself to focus on the sound of the waves, the warmth of the sun on my skin. But the air had changed. There was tension where there had been peace, a thick, unseen weight pressing down, threatening to smother the very serenity I had come here for. Then, she started walking toward me. Her strides were purposeful, her heels digging into the sand as if marking a path of confrontation. With every step, her posture grew stiffer, her presence more oppressive. I could already feel my heartbeat quicken, the calm of the morning evaporating like mist under the rising sun. I didn't know what she wanted, but I could tell from the way she never broke eye contact. This wasn't just some friendly beachgoer coming over for a chat. No, this was something else entirely. I stood my ground as she closed the distance between us, her expression hardening with each step. The air around her seemed to shift, heavy with the weight of someone who had convinced themselves they were in charge. When she finally stopped a few feet away, she didn't smile, didn't offer a greeting, just tilted her chin up and let the silence stretch long enough to make it uncomfortable. "You can't be here," she finally said, her voice sharp, clipped, carrying an authority she hadn't earned. For a moment, I just stared at her, certain I had misheard. "Excuse me? This is private property," she continued, her lips pursing as she crossed her arms. "You need to leave." I blinked at her, glancing around at the wide, open beach filled with other people, none of whom seemed to be facing the same interrogation. "This is a public beach," I said evenly, keeping my voice calm. "There's no restriction on who can be here." She scoffed, shaking her head like she couldn't believe she had to explain something so obvious to me. "This part of the beach is for homeowners only. Locals. Not just anyone can waltz in and set up like they own the place." I stared at her, baffled by the sheer confidence with which she spoke. "That's not true," I said, carefully choosing my words. "There are no signs, no barriers, this is a public access beach. Anyone can be here." Her expression darkened. "I live here. I know the rules," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "And I enforce them." That last part made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just some irritated beachgoer. She genuinely believed she had authority over this space. I let out a slow breath, keeping my voice measured. "Look, I'm not looking for trouble. I came here to enjoy my morning, just like everyone else. And I came here to make sure people like you aren't ruining it for the rest of us," she shot back, her eyes narrowing. "People like me." That phrase settled uneasily in my gut, the implication hanging in the air between us like a loaded gun. I clenched my jaw, feeling a slow heat rise in my chest. "I have every right to be here," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "You don't own this beach." Her lips curled into a knowing smirk, and that was the first moment I realized she had been waiting for this, the argument, the confrontation. She wasn't just trying to get me to leave. She wanted me to react. "You don't want to make this difficult," she said, her tone a mockery of concern. "If you leave now, we won't have a problem." I took in a steady breath, holding her gaze. "No," I said, simply. Her smirk vanished. For a split second, I saw something else flicker across her face, genuine disbelief. Like she wasn't used to people saying no to her. Her fingers twitched at her sides. Then, she recovered quickly, pulling something from her pocket, a small metal badge, worn and scratched, attached to a plastic card holder. She held it up just enough for me to see, her chin tilting up as she flashed it in my direction. "Since you seem so sure of yourself," she said, "maybe you'll believe it from someone with actual authority." I squinted at the badge, my stomach twisting the second I realized what she was doing. It wasn't a police badge. It wasn't even close. The words, Homeowners Association Board Member, were engraved into the cheap metal. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. "That's an HOA badge." She didn't flinch. "That's right," she said smoothly. "And the HOA has full authority over this community, including beach access." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "This is not private HOA property," I said, trying to hold back my growing frustration. She smiled, slow and smug. "Are you sure about that?" She was bluffing. I knew she was bluffing. But the audacity of it, the way she wielded that flimsy badge like it meant anything out here, sent a hot wave of anger through me. Still, I wasn't going to give her what she wanted. "Positive," I said. She sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "Unbelievable," she muttered under her breath before reaching into her pocket again. This time, she pulled out her phone. My stomach clenched. Was she really about to? "Guess I have no choice," she said, tapping her screen. "I'll have to let the police handle this." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm as she raised the phone to her ear. But the moment she started speaking, my blood ran cold. "Yes, I'm at the beach, and there's a person here who's becoming aggressive," she said, voice trembling in an expertly crafted display of distress. I felt my pulse slam in my ears. Yes. They refuse to leave even though they've been asked multiple times. I'm worried they might get violent." She was lying. Boldly, confidently, without a hint of hesitation. A few bystanders had stopped what they were doing, turning their heads toward us. Some whispered to each other, brows furrowed in concern. Others simply watched, curious but not yet fully understanding what was happening. But I knew what was happening. Karen wasn't just being entitled anymore. She was trying to weaponize law enforcement against me. I could feel my heart pounding as Karen continued her carefully crafted lie, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. "Yes, I'm afraid for my safety," she said into the phone, casting a quick glance in my direction before stepping away slightly, as if she were retreating from a threat. "I don't know what they'll do next." I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't react, not the way she wanted me to. That was the game she was playing. She wanted me to snap, to give her anything that would validate her ridiculous call. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I turned my head slightly, catching movement out of the corner of my eye. A few beachgoers had started to gather, watching the scene unfold. Some looked uncomfortable, others whispered to each other. A couple of them had their phones out, recording, not Karen, but me, as if they weren't sure what was happening but thought it might be important to capture. And then, just as she was about to rattle off another fabricated accusation, a voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Oh, give me a break. Karen flinched, spinning toward the sound. A man, maybe in his 40s, stood a few feet away, arms crossed over his chest, shaking his head in disbelief. "Seriously?" he continued, stepping forward. "You're pulling this stunt again?" Karen's expression flickered, just for a second, before she plastered on that tight, fake smile. "Excuse me," she said, her voice suddenly sugary sweet. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man scoffed, turning to the small crowd that had gathered. "She does this all the time. Last month, she called the cops on a family having a picnic because she didn't like that they were playing music." The whispers grew louder. Someone else, a woman in a wide-brimmed sun hat, spoke up next. "She tried to get my dad kicked out of the park because she said his wheelchair was obstructing the walkway." Karen's face darkened, her grip tightening on her phone. "This is harassment," she snapped. "I'm trying to enforce the rules, Anne." "There are no rules like that," the man interrupted. "You just like to act like you're in charge." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between the growing number of disapproving faces around her. And then, like a cornered animal, she pivoted. "Fine," she snapped, her voice rising. "If none of you care about public safety, I'll handle it myself." She stormed back toward me, her expression a mix of rage and desperation. Before I could react, she reached down and grabbed my towel, yanking it up like she was throwing out trash. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "There," she spat, tossing it aside. "Now maybe you'll get the hint." I stared at her, the last shred of patience inside me snapping. "Are you serious?" I asked, stepping forward. Karen squared her shoulders, her chin lifting. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. A few people in the crowd muttered in disbelief. Someone else pulled out their phone, this time recording her instead of me. "Ma'am," a new voice said. A firm, measured voice. A voice that commanded attention. Karen turned sharply, only to find herself face to face with a woman who had been standing quietly near the back of the crowd. She wasn't just another beachgoer. She had a kind of calm authority that made the air shift the second she spoke. "Who are you?" Karen demanded, her tone wavering just slightly. The woman held up her hand. A business card rested between her fingers. "My name is Victoria," she said smoothly. "I'm an attorney." Karen's face drained of color. Karen's smug expression flickered the moment Victoria introduced herself. Her mouth opened slightly as if to argue, but no words came out. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. The confidence she had wielded like a weapon began to falter, and I could see the gears in her mind turning, searching for a way to regain control. Victoria didn't give her the chance. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, her presence commanding. "I've been standing here for a while," she said coolly. "I heard everything." Karen's fingers clenched around her phone. "This has nothing to do with you," she snapped. "This is about keeping unauthorized people from taking over our beach." Victoria's sharp laugh cut her off. "Your beach?" she echoed, raising an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, are you under the impression that you own public property?" Karen bristled, straightening her posture. "I enforce community rules." "No, you don't," Victoria said, her voice firm. "You're not law enforcement, and you don't have any authority outside of your little HOA bubble. And even within that, your power is limited." She glanced around, motioning toward the small crowd. "You've been lying about local regulations, harassing beachgoers, and now, you've committed theft and property damage by throwing someone else's belongings." Karen's breath hitched. "That's ridiculous." "No," Victoria said, her expression cool. "What's ridiculous is that you think you can get away with it." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The tension had shifted entirely. The bystanders, once unsure of whether to intervene, now stood firmly in quiet defiance against Karen. Their eyes weren't on me anymore, they were on her, scrutinizing, judging. Someone near the back muttered, "Unbelievable." Karen swallowed hard. Her gaze darted between Victoria, the growing crowd, and the multiple phones now trained on her, capturing everything. The realization settled over her like a suffocating weight. Then, in a last, desperate attempt to salvage her authority, she turned her attention back to me. "You're still trespassing," she hissed, her voice tinged with hysteria. "I don't care what some lawyer says. The police are on their way, and when they get here, they'll remove you." A voice crackled through the speaker of her phone. "Ma'am," the dispatcher's voice said. "Did you just say this person is trespassing on a public beach?" The color drained completely from Karen's face. She fumbled with her phone, pressing it tighter against her ear. I mean, it's part of the HOA's jurisdiction," she stammered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, the dispatcher's voice returned, more clipped than before. "Ma'am, unless there is an actual threat or criminal activity occurring, you have no authority to remove anyone from public property. Are you falsely reporting an emergency?" Karen floundered, her jaw tightening. She knew she was backed into a corner. She couldn't lie her way out of this, not with the entire crowd watching her unravel in real time. Victoria folded her arms, tilting her head slightly. "You might want to be careful with your next words," she advised. "Filing a false police report is a criminal offense." Karen's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked around frantically, as if expecting someone, anyone, to step in and save her. But there was no one. The people who once might have feared her now saw her for exactly what she was. A bully. A fraud. A pathetic excuse for an authority figure. Her breathing quickened, and I saw it, the exact moment she realized that she had lost. Her posture collapsed in on itself, shoulders slumping under the weight of her own actions. Slowly, she reached for her phone and pressed the button to end the call. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a single clap rang out. Then another. And another. It wasn't an applause of victory, not the loud, triumphant kind you hear at the end of a dramatic movie. It was slow, deliberate, filled with quiet satisfaction. A judgment, rather than a celebration. Karen's face twisted in rage and humiliation. Her fists clenched at her sides as she turned sharply, muttering under her breath as she began to storm away. "Leaving so soon?" Victoria called after her, amusement lacing her voice. Karen didn't respond. She kept walking, her head low, her pace quickening, desperate to escape the weight of her own public downfall. As she disappeared past the beach entrance, I exhaled slowly, feeling the tension finally leave my body. Victoria turned to me with a small, knowing smile. "I think you just made some new friends," she said, nodding toward the crowd. I looked around at the people who had gathered, the same people who had witnessed Karen's entitlement crumble under the force of truth. Some were still murmuring to each other, shaking their heads. Others simply nodded at me in quiet solidarity. Karen had come here expecting to win. But in the end, the only thing she had succeeded in doing was destroying herself. The tension that had once gripped the beach dissipated, replaced by an almost surreal sense of justice settling over the sand like the fading tide. People began to disperse, shaking their heads, laughing quietly, some still watching the path where Karen had vanished. The echoes of her downfall lingered in the air, a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could wield power where they had none. Victoria turned to me, her expression amused yet satisfied. "She'll think twice before pulling that stunt again," she said, slipping her business card back into her pocket. "People like her always do, when they realize the world isn't playing by their rules." I let out a slow breath, the weight of the confrontation finally lifting. "I hope so," I said, scanning the beach, still taking in how quickly the crowd had turned. It wasn't just about me standing up to her, it was about everyone deciding they'd had enough of her self-proclaimed authority. And Karen? She wouldn't recover from this so easily. Word would spread. The videos people had recorded would circulate. The same people who had once feared or tolerated her would now see her as nothing more than a bitter, powerless bully. Her influence had crumbled in real time, and she had no one to blame but herself. As I picked up my towel, the same one she had so arrogantly tossed aside, I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. She had spent all that time trying to control me, to intimidate me, to remove me from the space she believed she owned. But in the end, she was the one who had to leave. The ocean waves rolled in, undisturbed by the drama that had unfolded, as steady and indifferent as ever. The sun was still shining, the breeze still carried the scent of salt, and the beach, the public beach, was still open to anyone who wished to enjoy it. I sat back down, right where I had started. Karen had come in, trying to push me out. But in the end, nothing had changed for me. For her, though, everything had. I stretched out on the sand, letting the warmth seep into my skin, savoring the moment. And as I closed my eyes, one last thought crossed my mind: karma has a funny way of working itself out. Have you ever had to deal with a Karen or an overreaching HOA trying to control something they had no right to? Share your experience below. I have a feeling I'm not the only one with a story like this.